Thank you. Okay, so everyone, we are about to start. So a pleasant morning to everyone. I am Julius Caddis, the Vice President of the Biological Science Society, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So it is a special day for us biology majors, as today's event is interesting and significant to talk about. Today, we will be learning about something that is not just relevant to our program, but to the field of public health, which is a global concern nowadays. So as our country continuously battles COVID-19, we are asking ourselves if what can we do to face the challenges of this pandemic. So to answer our questions, the FEU Department of Biological Sciences presents a seminar that is fitted for the question and to our nation's current state. As part of the project IAS VASE or IAS Virtual Activities Supporting Education, we present to you today's seminar entitled COVID-19 Updates, Emerging Treatment Strategies. So, but before we proceed to the main event or to the main talk, may I call on a faculty member from the Department of Biological Sciences, Dr. William G. Lim, to give his opening remarks. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Dean Rowena Capulong Reyes, distinguished guests, dear students, my dear friends and colleagues at the Institute of Arts and Sciences, Department of Biology, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to welcome you to the webinar on COVID-19 updates, emerging treatment and strategies. The importance of being updated regarding this infectious disease that has affected our lives since March 2020. I can still remember that day when I was about to give the midterm exam for my class, when an announcement was made asking all of us to cancel or all of our remaining classes beginning 1 p.m. on that day. Unknowingly, that will be the last time that we will hold physical classes, at least for this year. So after a few months of ECQ, MECQ, and GCQ, now we are here trying to make do of what we have and adapt to this new normal. Holding online classes so that learnings will not stop, and holding webinars like this instead of seminars to keep all of us updated about this dreaded disease called coronavirus disease or 2019 novel coronavirus, or in short, COVID-19. As of October 22, we have 365,552 coronavirus cases here in the Philippines, resulting to 6,783 deaths. Active cases at this moment, is about 44,772, and the number of recoveries is 312,333. Now that the government is slowly but surely reopening our country for business and work, expect these numbers to increase if we will not protect ourselves from this virus. So it is very important that we know how to protect ourselves, our loved ones from getting this dreaded disease. And if ever we get infected, hopefully not, we know what symptoms to expect, what to do, how to fight it, and be able to survive it. This webinar will equip all of us with all the knowledge we must know regarding this virus, from its origin, method of transmission, incubation period, period of communicability, signs and symptoms, clinical presentation, whether mild to moderate, severe, or critical. We will also be updated on the different treatment, curative modalities, whether proven, unproven, on clinical trials. Of our questions about COVID-19 will be addressed, leading to a confident leading to a more confident us in facing this new normal forced upon us by COVID-19. Again, thank you and welcome.
Okay, so that's right. So with the current state of the Philippines due to COVID-19, it is indeed timely to talk about this topic. Thank you, Dr. Lim, for that. So now to start with our seminar, let me call on Ma'am Binil Dalaza, the Department Chair of the Biological Sciences, to introduce our speaker for today.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
Our
morning.
speaker for today is the Executive Director of Merz Asia Pacific Medical Affairs and Clinical Education. He joined the company in 2014 growth of the company's medical capabilities. He pharmaceutical experience in the areas of clinical research and regulatory functions within a wide range of therapeutic class, clinical and aesthetic dermatology, anti-infectives, anesthetics, NSAIDs, cardio, metabolic, biologicals, and OTC brands. Proponent of several investigator-initiated clinical trials in dermatology and neurology, developed a global patient engagement platform, quality care for clinical dermatology, and co-authored specific publications in support of the use of neurotoxins. Completed his medical degree in the Philippines and further advanced studies in public health at King's College London with specialization in pharmacology and neurotoxicology. He also attended a postgraduate program on skin toxicology at the National Skincare Center, Singapore. Our speaker for today is an active member of the Association of Pharmaceutical Physicians in Singapore and was formerly its vice president for clinical research. I am also proud to announce that he is a graduate of our BS Biology program here in FEU. In behalf of Biological Sciences, I now present you our very own speaker for today, Dr. Owen Sunga. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Lasa, for that very, I'm humbled for your introduction. So good morning to everybody, and I am very happy to be at least in the spirit in FEU back again. I mean, missing the old days when I'm still walking into the BS Bio or IAS as one of the faculties, and of course, I'm also looking forward for the opportunity of returning, probably most likely after the pandemic. But I'm very happy that I'm invited here, as mentioned by Dr. Lim as well and by Ma'am Lasa. My intention here is to really provide you updates and some of the current affairs in terms of looking into treatment perspectives and what are the real situation, where are we right now, and what are the things that we need to understand in order for us to, I would say, protect ourselves into this current pandemia or pandemic. So I'd like my deck, if you may. Hold on a second. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes po.
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to give you an update on COVID-19 and some of the emerging treatment strategies, and then we will go more in depth details on some of the treatments provided now and some of the things that are actually available in the onset. So my agenda will cover three specific areas. Just give you the background of the disease, what's the current pathology, some of the general epidemiology, and our treatment strategies, as mentioned by Dr. Lim, some of the vaccines and the treatment tracker that has already been evolving in a fair number of months. Looking into the disease, so as we are all aware, coronavirus is an envelope RNA virus. It's a zoonotic in origin. So when we say zoonotic, the general theory is most of which the species itself comes from animals and are actually transmitted to either higher form of beings like us. There are also consideration that, as generally known, RNA viruses are more infectious. Usually they have higher mutation rates, higher probabilities to infect new host species because of their exceptionally shorter generation time and their faster evolutionary rates. So these are some of the critical characteristics of the virus. There are important human pathogens, and in fact, around 7 to date that are available or are present in the environment, and 4 of which causes mild self-limiting respiratory infection. 3 are known to be causing fatal pneumonia or cause deaths regarding these conditions. We know SARS. That's one of the first condition that has arise from. Sorry about that. My slides keep. This SARS, as we all know, hit us a few years back. Although they were saying that apparently people started to develop humoral immunity to it, and then the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome followed, and then which is the SARS-CoV, which we are all now battling. So this is first reported in Wuhan, in the city of China, and that was in December 2019. I very much remember this time frame because I was supposed to to my headquarters office in Frankfurt in Germany. I think that's about end of January, when I was told that there's no longer available flights from Singapore to Frankfurt. It's a bit tough situation. Everybody was trying their best to move in and out, and there was like a big global congress happening in France, where I was supposed to go to give 2 lectures, and I can't do it. So those are some of the milestones for me that made me. Sorry about that. What's happening? Yeah, that made me a bit I would say unaware of what's happening into the situation. But then again, that said, it evolved fast, and later on it was known to be already as COVID-19. Originally, it was being contemplated what should we name. I mean, the WHO in particular, but it was renamed as COVID-19 in this particular pandemic. Now, looking into the actual transmission process, COVID-19 is mainly spreading or being transmitted from person to person. That's one of the clinical identified transmission process. Understanding the transmission risk to date is still incomplete. Epidemiologic investigations are being done, particularly in Wuhan. Although the problem is, the missing point here is they can't identify patient zero, because the spread was really like it's uncontrollable. Talaga nakita yung kung sino yung pinaka main consideration, and plus the fact that they believe that it's all coming from from the market. The origin is from the market. There was even considerations that this came from animals, bats, snakes, rats, and all these lower forms of animals that has been identified. But it wasn't really 100% proven. So these are all hypothetical considerations in terms of. But that said, it is very clear that it can be transmitted by individuals to another individual. And the main consideration of transmission is what we know as droplet, or this is spread when someone, for example, sneeze, cough, it lands into the mouth or nose or in any individual nearby, in the mucosa of that individual, so it can spread. So close contact with someone sick, like hugging, shaking hands, kissing, for example, are also some of the example situations where it's easily being spread. That's the reason why we started globally to have these protective measures of wearing masks. Situations, what specific mask would protect us? Would this be just the ordinary mask, or would it be a required N95, etc.? So all these consideration. Direct person-to-person respiratory transmission is the primary means of transmission, as noted to date, based from studies. It is though, I mean, they thought, as I've said, that it can occur through close range contact within approximately 6 feet or 2 meters. That's majority of the social distancing measures, as you've heard, like it should be at least 2 meters apart via respiratory droplets. That's also the reason why most of the, for example, restaurants or even any areas that would, there's a limitation on in terms of that distancing measure. But it's very difficult to how do I say, to administer it and to follow. And I understand that. Like, for example, if you go into the market, right, in the wet market area, it's difficult because people are just everywhere. But this is actually one of the biggest challenge that we are facing. How we are able to really apply and be able to adapt into this mindset change and behavioral change. But that's how it's being spread, and that's actually we have to be we have to be mindful of it in that situation. Now, aside from the there are also specific high risk group, and the identified high risk group is 60 years of age with health conditions, either lung or heart diseases, diabetes, cancer, or the immune system. Well, usually the risk of severity disease gradually when you go with a younger age, but it increases with age starting from around 40 years. And it is important that we understand that these are the high risk group. When I say high risk group, of leading to a critical point of the condition is higher as compared to just having probably a symptomatic case, or probably having uh, it's mild, or it resolves spontaneously. So as we all know, viruses, we don't really have a direct treatment. Not all virus condition has a specific treatment. And RNA virus, let's say cold virus. Cold virus is an RNA virus. We don't really treat cold virus with any specific treatment. What we normally provide are supportive treatments in order for us to reduce the symptoms of the condition. Should allow the body its own mechanism to really produce its fighting cells, no, in order to combat the infection and be well after that. Other viral condition, that's how we treat these cases, and that's the reason why these high risk group, although not all, would have uh, that greater risk to get that critical condition. So yun yung want to prevent, because while I would agree, and I will show later in the epidemiology data, that in general incidence and even in the case fatality, it's very, very mild, it's very low, but the chances of us these high risk group infected is also higher because the infectious rate is high. And if it gets to them and they are having all these risk factors, then the chances for them to get to be hospitalized and of course um, they, it leads to death, for example. So yun yung as much as possible iniiwasan natin sa situation na ito. So all these high risk group has currently specific areas where they are more prone to develop the critical condition. And it was being studied further that apparently some of them are because they have all these inflammatory reactions in the body that actually makes the virus, in a layman term, stronger in producing more and replicating more and causing more of these unwanted effects or unwanted outcome. So that's why I have to be clear that these are some of the most important consideration. Now, what are the things that we should watch in terms of the symptoms? Now, we know that it's generally within 2 to 14 days after the exposure to the virus. That's why in the standard regimen, when you need to quarantine yourself, it is minimum 2 weeks. All right. So there's such requirement because the symptoms usually are within this period of time. And the most common symptoms, as you are already aware, is definitely fever, tiredness, dry cough, and then there's also muscle or body aches, nasal congestion, sore throat. So it's very general type of symptoms that can other condition. That's why we have to be very sure if this is COVID. That's why testing is very important. Now, there are certain cases as the disease or the condition evolve, there were conditions apparently that are associated symptoms also develop like vomiting or diarrhea or even loss of smell or loss of taste. Sometimes they don't have other symptoms except for the sense of or the loss of taste or smell. Ito lang yung symptoms na lumalabas dun sa patient. And it's worrying because normally you don't get those symptoms. So this is actually in fact, in UK, majority of the patient presents loss of taste or loss of smell without any other symptoms. That's why it was really bothering during that time when they have the hype of the cases are going, and this are monitored. Now, looking into the epidemiology, what is the general perspective of the condition with respect to infection, with respect to recovery rates, and all that? As based from the general statistics from the current cases, around 95% of people who have been sick with COVID-19 to date have recovered or actually recovering. So it's not really bad after all. There's a very big group of individuals. In fact, of that 95%, probably about 70% are actually asymptomatic. They don't really show symptoms, but majority of these asymptomatics are considered to be super carriers. When I say super carriers, it means that somehow they are the ones that really spreads the infection fast to those that are susceptible. So that's also the challenge. And we don't know because they are asymptomatic. They are presumed well until random testing has been done and we found them to be positive. That's how I stored all these asymptomatic cases. And there's also a consideration that currently 4 of 5 people infected with COVID-19 will experience mild or moderate symptoms. So isa lang of the 5 individuals actually goes to that critical stage. And why it is, well, of course, despite of that, bakit nakakatakot pa din siya? Kasi there are certain countries that are very old in. So, like, let's give an example, Italy. So, beginning of March, when the virus starts hitting Europe, Italy was very concerned because the first city that has been infected, which is Lombardy, is actually the inhabitants of that city is 85% old people. And that's the reason that's at the start of this condition in Italy because of the criticality that apparently we don't know yet at that time the risk factor was age. So that's one thing that has struck majority of the countries in Europe because they have aging population as well. Now, while COVID-19 is often mild, I have already mentioned this, we all need to work together now to protect the most vulnerable. And even in the household setting. So ito rin yung limitation. There are certain countries that, for example, in a single house, the individuals that are actually staying there is more than what it can yung standard occupancy requirement, like yung isang house, for example, 4 or 5 people lang dapat, pero more than 4 or more than 5 yung nakatira, so there's a higher risk transmission also. And as I've already mentioned, people over 60 years. And what is interesting is that so far, children and adolescents have been far less affected by COVID-19, and their symptoms have always been very mild, which is very good. Although there were like sporadic cases in US where there are individuals within the age of the adolescents have actually died, but usually this, based from the case finding studies, these are the individuals apparently who had some previous conditions also, like neurologic symptoms like CP, cerebral palsy, and all that. So apparently, these were all predisposing considerations in a very small, but it wasn't really proven that these are some of the critical things that has to be mentioned or has to be identified in children. Kasi nga, hindi rin naman ganun kadami yung cases. So looking into the overall status, I believe Dr. Lim has shared a while ago specifically the number in the Philippines. But in the world or across the world, this was yesterday, last night, there are about 41 million. See, it's really quite spread in North and South America, in the European countries, part of Asia. If you can look into that lower part of Asia, that's the India area. And of course, as you see here, we are Philippines, and I'm here. Part of Singapore is we are a dot. So, and in here in Singapore, it's also very critical because we are a very small population. We're a small country, and yet we have around 60 or less, about 55,000 cases. So when we were going 1,000 a day, that was very critical at that time frame. But at least at right now, there's a bit of cases. Because we slowly open up, there were like individuals returning from some countries who are permanent residents of Singapore, and that's why we have some of these imported cases. But as you see in general, there's about this number of cases, about 41 million in 189 countries, and the current deaths is about 1 million or more than a million across the world. Some of the things that I'd like to share before we go into the treatment strategies. The virus that caused COVID-19 is a viral condition. It's called coronavirus. And I think this is a common myth. In general, people would think that if they take antibiotics, they can be cured of the condition. And this is not a bacterial infection. I think I'd like to mention that very specifically. Although there are certain situations when these COVID cases goes into the hospital, and if you look into their actual treatment regimen, they are being given antibiotics. That is because we wanted to prevent secondary bacterial infection, not because we wanted to treat the disease outrightly or the condition. So the propensity of going or having another infection on top of the viral infection is very high, especially for the hospitalized individual, because there are a lot of infections in the hospital. There are hospital acquired, and that's the reality. That's why we give them antibiotics, but not to treat coronavirus or COVID-19 per se. All right. So that's just a consideration on the disease, how it's evolving, what are the current epidemiology state, and what are the good news that in fact in general situation children are not really very much affected. 95% recover, and about 4 of the 5 people who gets the infection produces only mild symptoms or mild condition. Let's now go into the treatment strategies that are being done across the world. So, from a pharmaceutical point of view, I'm sharing these strategies because across the world, all the pharmaceutical companies are really working hard to find a definite cure and to find a definite protective strategy, which is the vaccine. And I will be very clear that this is based on what the science is, and this is generated based on clinical trials that are being conducted across the world. So let's go into the treatment track. 22 treatments that are available. 2 are widely used. There were like 2 of which are promising evidence. I'm gonna go into the labels quickly later on. And 13 are tentative or mixed evidence. 2 are not promising. 3 are considered to be pseudoscience or fraud. There is no cure yet for COVID-19. Let's just be very clear on that. And even the most promising treatments to date only help certain groups of patients, not very high. And I have a slide later on. Philippines is actually part of the biggest ever trial created in the history, if I may, in looking for a treatment in a particular condition. Across the world, it's called discovery trial, but in the Philippines, of course, it was termed as solidarity trial. Let me go into those labels that I've just shared in that previous slide. So when I say widely used, these are the treatments that have been widely used by doctors, systems in the hospitals, and apparently are producing good effects or good outcomes. Either it reduces the risk of going to death, or they reduces the symptoms of the infection. Not necessarily eventually it succumb to death, but they reduces symptoms. But eventually, of course, because there are other factors that has to be considered, namamatay din yung patient. But so far, these are considered to be proven in terms of the population settings, in terms of the cases that they have tried. And mind you, when I say treatment, it doesn't necessarily mean that these are drugs that you take. This can also be processes. This can also be I'm going to share later. Promising evidence are those with early evidence from studies on patients suggesting effectiveness, but more research is needed. So these are those which are undergoing clinical studies in support of finding a definite outcome. And there's always that required significance. So pag nakikita nyo sa clinical studies on publication, significantly proven to be effective, for example. The statistics from the group of the population that has been tested is proven to be in effect en mass pag ginamit sa malaking population size. Ganun din yung magiging epekto. And that's the reason why we're looking towards that effectivity rate. Now, tentative or mixed evidence are those treatments that shows promising results in somehow preclinical studies like cells, animals, which needs to be confirmed further in individuals. That's the time when they have to test to human subjects. And others have yielded encouraging results in some studies in humans, which look at existing data sets rather than starting a new trial. Not really 100% proven to be promising in that sense. So it's somehow mixed and or are considered to be tentative in this situation. So when you go into the other 3, not promising obviously does not produce any value at all. And pseudoscience, these are some of the things that has been shared by media, interviews, and all that. And these are the myths. These are the ones that people would say, oh, you have to clear viruses, or you have to take vitamin C, mega doses of vitamin C, so you can prevent the disease. Wash your face with ethanol, or there was this was from US, And I'm going to quote President Trump did say this in one of the interviews. Like he said, you have to drink ethanol or methanol, or you have to expose yourself under the sun rays, UV radiation, because it will kill the viruses. These are definitely pseudoscience or fraud because there's no proven existing data sets that would guarantee that they are effective against. So evidence in cells, I've already mentioned that. These are some of the preclinicals. We do it in the animals or lower forms of animals before we try it in humans. So I'm going to give a quick example of these. Examples of widely used, these are not after all medications. These are processes or steps or devices as I've shared. So these are the two most commonly used and apparently produce in terms of the outcomes of individuals that are in hospital. Prone positioning, this is very much prominent in the European and the US settings. In the Philippines, I believe PGH is applying it as well, and in some I would say private institutions. So the simple act of flipping COVID-19 patients onto their bellies opens up the lungs. So that's helping them expand. And that maneuver has become a commonplace in hospitals around the world since, as I've said, start of the pandemic. The treatment tested in a range of clinical trials as a process. And they were trying to test this like every 30 minutes, every 1 hour, or even at least a few hours more in order for them to see whether the breathing capabilities of the individual who was having some respiratory difficulty would really improve. Of course, as we all know, ventilators are became a commodity, and in fact in medical device industry this is now the top of the line. It's like the icing of the cake, like everybody is looking for it. And this apparently has been a standard of care in most of the hospitals who actually administer treatment for COVID patients. The hospital has to be equipped with ventilators and they have to have a fair number of amount of ventilators, and this actually assess the adequacy of that hospital or of that institution. So obviously it's a life-saving device in many cases, and this supports individuals who are distressed or having respiratory distress. As I've said, this is the late critical stage of the condition, and somehow ventilators apparently supports them from breathing and eventually allows the lungs to heal and thereby recover from that state. So these are the widely used treatment options or strategies that are being provided currently at this state. Now, in terms of drugs, one medication that is an antiviral agent that has been tried and being used in the trials across the world is this remdesivir. Remdesivir is an agent used to treat Ebola or hepatitis C, and it did deliver a bit of that. I mean, I would say lackluster results, but it's being tried for coronavirus or for COVID to reduce death rates or to reduce the chances of going into that critical state of those very ill individuals. Um, it is very suggestive. The current number of population that has been enrolled for this study is almost 100K, and it's proven to be producing good results, especially for the very the only difference, of course, the only not difference rather, the only consideration here is the side effects. As you all know, any particular drug has a side effect, and somehow this is things that are not, well, I mean, we don't have that capacity to control yet, or we don't see the direct outcome or the direct AEs yet because we're just trying it now. I mean, they have not been repurposed before, so we call them collectively as because different type of condition, but now they are being retried or retested for coronavirus. So yeah, remdesivir, but they have a bit of that unwanted side effects. That's why there's also that we have to be cautious, or the doctors are being very cautious also in trying this medication. But nevertheless, the trials are proving to be effective. Is another agent that has been used collectively and apparently has been we all know steroids are being used to treat inflammatory conditions. And a study of more than 6,000 people found that dexamethasone reduced deaths by one third in patients. And in fact, this is of the four being tested in the Solidarity trial or even in the Discovery, dexamethasone or steroids is the only one which has proven direct effect, at least in reduction of deaths or curative effects in terms of the patient. Now, another drug that has been tried is this hydrochloroquine or chloroquine, which is an antimalarial drug or a treatment being given for lupus condition. And well, it was initially provided in China. They saw a bit of a good number of cases that are responding, but later on, when they expanded the trial, it proves to have more side effect. And usually, it's liver toxic. It's very liver toxic, and the enzymes really go whoop high above the sky, and that's the reason why it's being supervised. But nonetheless, as we are really exploring, so this is how we do clinical studies. We try it's a trial that said what's the ultimate outcome, but that said, based from the mechanism of effect or the mechanism of action of the drug, we try to look into it whether it would produce some of those good advantage to the patient. And that's where it is right now. It's still being used because in some individuals who have actually had the infection, they apparently produce but yeah, these are some of the limitations of the current treatment search for treatment for coronavirus. Already shared, this is the Solidarity trial. uh, Being is part of it, and these are the treatments that are being tried. I've already mentioned a fair number. Lopinavir or ritonavir is actually drugs being used for HIV patients, and interferon these other conditions. And as I've said, only corticosteroids apparently produces a good effect so far in terms of the trial. They're still searching further, and they're trying, and but that still have to be checked and proven by WHO. So that's where we are right now in terms of treatment. Now, what about vaccine? Because this is the talk of the town. Majority of the individuals around the or well around the world, everybody are like looking vaccine soon is coming, and this would definitely help us go back to normalcy. So to date, the vaccine tracker is this is already the ones that are in the phases of clinical trials. There are about 90 plus that are in the preclinical stage. So that's totaling to about 170 or 180s now. I think it's more than that. And I must say that there are 6 in the limited group, but these are the vaccines that has been approved in the individual countries where they came from for early or limited use without undergoing the full scale of a clinical trial. So what I want to say here, my dear colleagues, is that in the development of a drug or in the development of a vaccine, each of these has a specific phase, and these phases has specific timeline. Why do we have to have a timeline? Because we wanted to see good effects, we wanted to see also bad effects. All right. And we want to see whether at the end of the day, it really is producing the desired or good effect in a majority of the population. And that timeline should not be compromised. But in the situation where we really need it, so is there a way to speed it up? So this is the thing that is happening right now. It's either one or two or three phases are combined all together and they are being done parallelly, or we don't do one of the phases, let's just jump on straight to to the other phases and go along and start approving it in some countries for people to use it. And from a healthcare perspective, from an epidemiologist and a public health specialist, it is not really right to do so because the chances of the not so good effects, we don't see it now. Maybe you see it in general population that, oh, it's producing a good effect. But the overall state later on of that condition, of that drug, of that treatment, will not be happening or will not come out until certain time frame because each of us has different variabilities. Our genes are not the same. We don't respond to the drugs similarly across or to a medication or to any part of whatever we take. And there are also limitations because some of us may have conditions, some of us may not have. And apparently, those conditions may actually either increase the state of the drug in the system or decrease the effect of the drug. There are a lot of conditions or considerations that has to be monitored or make mention of. And that's the reason why I don't want to burst your bubbles in terms of hearing a possibility that vaccine will come out soon. Maybe, yes, but whether that is effective, I am not very confident of that. And I just want to share examples. Look at what happened to Dengvaxia. Dengvaxia was released haphazardly, and what happened? So there were like all these incidents that are coming out that was never reported in their early clinical trials. And as classic coronavirus, I'm sure you've been reading news. There are two big companies who are max producer expert companies, but they have actually paused. They have stopped their treatments or they have stopped their trials simply because some of the patients started developing an unwanted condition. And it's not even in a full scale phase 3 trial, it's just beginning phase 3. So that's something that we have to make consideration. And plus the fact, then again, that this virus is an RNA virus. Okay, I'm not making everybody scared or to be afraid of this, but I'm just telling you all that this is the current state and we have to make sure that we are all aware. And that's why prevention is better than cure right now, if you will ask me from a healthcare perspective, because it's a long walk for us before we able to go in and reach that level. So these are the phases of the clinical trials that are being under that vaccine production. And let me go quickly into all these stages. So when we go preclinical testing, it's being tested in animals just to check for the immune response. As I've shared, about 90 plus preclinical vaccines are being tested. Phase 1, small number of people just to test safety and dosing. Phase 2, a bit 100. So we start increasing the number of individuals. And phase 3, these are mass testing, thousands of people. And as indicated in this slide, the FDA said that a coronavirus vaccine would have to protect at least 50% of vaccinated people to be considered effective. In fact, my dear listeners, this actually has been reduced. In a normal scheme of production of trials in drug strategies, 50% is not a good indicator of protection. Our standard is about 65 to 70%. But because it's now effective, so not because we want to reduce it, but at least in a general state, 50% is considered to be, I would say, approved in that setting. Now, there are medications in China, or rather vaccines in China and Russia that has been already released for early or limited approval. I'm sure you've heard about that, but we're not sure whether they have serious risks. As I've said, they've not undergone a full clinical phase 3 trial, but they have already been released in the market. Approval, this is once it's all out, the studies have been laid upon and is really proving effectivity. Combined phases, as I've already mentioned, is to fast track the development of the vaccine. So these are some of the examples of vaccines that are currently being tested or has been released for limited use. So China has 2. This is the first one. the product is coming from Cancino Biologics, and they in May they published promising results from a phase 1 safety trial, and in July they reported that their phase 2 trial demonstrated that the vaccine produces strong immune response. What is important from a healthcare perspective when we read clinical studies is they have a very robust phase 3 before they even go to phase 4, or this is now the pre-approval state. So Cancino would not say whether vaccinations would be mandatory or optional for soldiers. So because this is a vaccine that has been sponsored or hoping to really protect the military force, but yeah, that's one of the considerations they're trying to establish. And starting in August or few months back, they began running phase 3 in 3 countries: Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Russia. So to date, I have not heard on the full scale of their report, but as we are all aware, until there are proven to be immediate outcomes that are serious, then there's a time they start reporting it. But so far, this has not been updated until the last month of September. This is the Sputnik 5 under the Gamilaya Research Institute of Russia. This has also been released, and this was apparently the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has announced that he got it, and I think one of his daughter also had it. It's a Russian healthcare regulator that has approved it, Sputnik 5, and they started initiating their phase 3 trial as well. But then again, it's not really a big number of population yet, and we have not really seen the full scale of that positive results. This is another Russian agent under Vector Institute, and this is an example of a vaccine that is being tried for a combined phases. And in fact, even before it finished its phase 1, phase 2, they have been already approved for early use. So this is another agent that is being available in Russia and certain parts of Middle East. So phase 3 approved for limited use is another drug, excuse me, by the Wuhan Institute of Biological Products. It's under now at phase 3. They have launched it in Middle East in July, in some Southern American countries, Peru and Morocco in Europe. Following months over the summer, the company later said the government gave it approval to inject hundreds of thousands of people with its 2 experimental vaccines, and hopefully they will be releasing their first report for phase 3, the what we call a limited preliminary data set, by beginning November 1st week. So they're the ones that are trying to be immediately en masse for population use. Sinovac is another agent in China that is being released, and in their phase 1-2 trials on 743 volunteers found no severe adverse effect. They have been started in Indonesia and Turkey, and they started registering this for vaccines for children. Now, the thing is, in China, and I wouldn't say that, but this is more for general information. We don't see the full scale of the report, and the only time they release it is when it's over or it's completed. That's why the results within that stage, whether they have had some unwanted effects, etc., we don't see that, and they're very private in terms of reporting, in terms of their studies. They don't even put this in the standard clinical.gov.clinical trials section. So there's a collective listings of all clinical trials happening in the world. They only put it once it's completed. So that's the challenge. So these are some of those undergoing phase 3. These are the big companies that have collaborated and worked together. As you see, there are certain scenarios where companies will work together in order for them to hasten up or speed up the process of production of vaccine. The two giants that I have mentioned, Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca, they momentarily stopped their phases. I think one has already commenced back, but AstraZeneca reported yesterday, if I may, one death among the cases. It's a 28-year-old physician in Brazil who have either tried a placebo or a vaccine. So they can't give the full details because they can't disclose it. It's undergo when you are in a clinical trial, you can't undisclose because it would jeopardize the full outcome. But they reported a death from that ongoing trial. So these are some of the vaccines that I'd like to share that are being done collaboratively, but we are still in search, hoping that we are able to find a better one amongst the phase three, and hoping that this would be en masse release across the population. So apparently, World Health said that it will be under a lottery phase. So ila-lottery siya. But then again, of course, the most immediate countries are those that with higher number of cases. So they will prioritize it. In other words, before I go in some of the final words that I'd like to share for the preventive strategies, I'd like to share some of the myths and I'd like to demystify all this because this is not true. And these are some of the things that are prevailing, and we should be aware and we should share to all our friends, our family, relatives, that they have to stick with what science is saying and what is actually real in terms of the situation. Micronutrients, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc are critical for well functioning of the immune system and play a vital role in promoting health and nutritional well-being. But there is no guidance on the use of these micronutrients as a treatment for COVID-19. So we want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. And this should not be taken in mega doses in order for you to be protected from this condition. Most people who get COVID-19, as I've already shared from the beginning of the deck, they either have mild to moderate, 4 out of 5 people, and recover spontaneously without much of the supportive care, or some would have those supportive care. So it's not really very bad after all. It's just that we want to prevent it from spreading because, again, we have a high risk group of individuals, and we want to prevent these high risk group to to be exposed to get the infection. Henceforth, they may not go into that critical stage of the disease. This is another myth. Hot peppers in your food. There were even news of paprika putting up a lot of this turmeric, etc., in all your daily juices, treatments, and all that, in order for you to be prevented. It's not correct. The best way to protect yourself against the virus is to keep at least 1 meter away, as I've already shared. In terms of social distancing, wash your, and it is also beneficial for you to have a healthy diet, exercise regularly, sleep well, and keep hydrated. And the best of all that is this: we should not be doing whatever has been shared from all these internet, social media platforms, that you can take all these elements in order for you to be protected. It is extremely dangerous, and it might even harm you rather than protect you from the condition. Protect yourself and the others from COVID-19. This is our best method of or way of getting with our normal lives or the current situation right now. Wash your hands, cover when you need to cough, when you need to sneeze, wash hands again thereafter. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. It's very common. I myself, when I was just doing my first few slides, I have to touch my nose. But that's a common mannerism. We have to prevent and we have to be cautious of it. And keep 1 meter distance away from others as much as possible. It's very difficult, I understand, but we have to find a way to go step by step into this limitation. I know that it's a challenging times right now. Everybody is on this situation, but we need to hold hands, not literally hold hands, but we need to hold hands to really work into this protective mechanism so we lower the risk. All right, we lower the risk of the condition and thereby reduce the chances, as they say, flatten the curve of the condition, and we reduce the chances of getting it as infectious and as critical in most cases. Last slide. With that said, thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Owen. So that was definitely informative, and I'm pretty sure that all of the attendees learned a lot, especially in terms of the progress that is currently being adopted by the healthcare sector to combat COVID-19 and the promising vaccines that we should watch out for in the future. So, along with that, so I think we'll now proceed to the question and answer portion. So, but before we ask questions from the audience here, yung mga nandito sa live ngayon. So, we actually have some questions prepared for you, Doc. So, can I proceed na po ba with the first question? Okay,
Go ahead.
so for the first question po, Doc, Doc, do you think that the Philippines will be COVID-free by 2021? Or if no, then how long will it take to completely ease this pandemic?
Okay, that's a very good question. But I will not be speaking on my personal thoughts or assumption, but based from the science, based from the criticality of the condition, it will take a while. Um, I think, as I've already shared from my last slide, the best prevention is the best cure, right? I mean, prevention is the best cure for now. If we are all to be mindful of that and we follow it strictly as possible, then I think we can flatten that curve and we'll be able to smoothen it. I mean, in terms of the day-to-day living. Now, in terms of COVID-free, 2021, I would say is a little early date, a little early timeline. I mean, unfortunately, yes. Even in myself, I this as soon as possible, but it's just a matter of time when we find definite cure. It's just a matter of time when we find vaccines, the right vaccine for it. And we were thinking, I mean, some of my colleagues when we were talking about it, will we develop humoral immunity? What is it? Like en masse people has been exposed and we develop antibodies. So antibodies is the fighting substance in the body that is produced when you are introduced into a foreign organism such as viruses. And if you have a very good titers of antibodies, you are protected from the condition moving forward. So there are situations we thought that we will have that eventually, just like SARS, for example. We didn't develop vaccines for SARS. We didn't develop vaccines for MERS-CoV. These are still ongoing conditions, like people still getting infection of it. But we were able to control it because, yeah, humoral immunity started to develop. But the thing is, with the current clinical findings, the ongoing clinical findings for COVID, there were individuals who had been cured of it, but after certain months, they started to having the infection back again. That's the state of reinfection. And there were like reported cases in Japan and even in China or in Taiwan in particular. So we don't know whether there's a short phase of that antibody development. For sure, they did develop antibodies. That's why they get that cure effect or cure outcome. But to what extent did that antibody stayed in their system? We don't know. We have not studied it. We have not measured it. So these are predictors, all right, of the disease state. Where will the disease go? How will it come into end, and how these process will ensue? And the current predictors are not very clear right now. So time 2021 is a little earlier time frame. I mean, majority of the healthcare providers or healthcare sectors are looking into the time of quarter two, quarter three of 2020. A good vaccine will be out, but we will not completely eradicate it, not until probably the next 2 or 3 years or so. So that might take some time. That may take a while. So that's my answer for that question.
Okay po, thank you so much. So for the next question, Doc, how likely do you think that the Philippine government would still employ lockdown here in the Philippines? Of course, especially that there's no vaccine yet.
Okay, I'm not in the Philippines, so I don't have the clarity on that. Um, I think our government is, I have to be clear with this. This is a very political question. I think the government is doing their best. Any government for that matter is doing their best in terms of working for establishing some measures. But lockdown state is a common situation now, and even travel restriction is very common. I don't think travel restrictions will ease out not until very soon, and that's the reason why I feel bad about the airline industry. They are the most affected industry above all. And well, there were sufficient evidence, at least from the current published studies, that is not really as infectious in an airborne state like in the planes and all that. But I mean, there's no guarantee. There is no complete guarantee, and if individuals starts to be, I think, to answer that, if Filipinos, if us start to be very mindful of our situation, starts to be adapting well to really the rules, because there are countries who are very strict. Singapore is one. I have to set that as an example. Is very strict here. If you don't follow strict rules, you have to be fined, or you have to be caned. I don't want to be caned. So, and I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars just because of not wearing a mask outside. So there are a lot of restrictive rules. These are being imposed by the countries to really put up some control measures. And Philippines, I believe the government would would really monitor this based on the situation. If it's not working well, if your cases are going higher and higher, obviously lockdown states has to be done. Of course, there are other factors to be considered, like economy and all that. This has to be established well, so it has to be a balance between that. But I think not just Philippines, the rest of the world will continue to impose certain restrictive policies unless we have really flattened and we have stabilized the curve of the condition or the cases. Yeah.
Okay, Doc. So thank you po again. So the next question and the last po sa mga na-prepare na question is that is there definite evidence na po ba as to how or where novel coronavirus started?
So the most the prevailing hypothesis now is that about half of the percentage of the genes or the genome of the virus came from animals, as we know, bats in particular, and even there was even like from a snake, bats at least. So the original state is it came from the marketplace where these are being sold and being eaten alive or something like that, not properly cooked, in China, in Wuhan. And that's one of the considerations. But because we failed. So what is patient zero? The first ever infected patient. We there was a failure to identify that, or it wasn't really transparent enough to report who was the patient zero. We weren't able to identify whether it was to human or it was coming from animals. That was our clear limitation right now. But studies apparently are coming out that it might have evolved from a zoonotic condition now to a human to human kind of virus. Yeah.
Okay pa. So that's it for the question. So everyone, the table is now open for question po. Sa chat box lang po, or pwede pong magsalita if you want. So, but ayan, si Ma'am Mary Gutierrez po is my question agad. So, if COVID-19 viruses have the ability to mutate, what then would be the impact or the discovery of the
Good question, Ma'am Mary, because unfortunately, this is the reason why, example of an RNA virus, HIV, we haven't really found a cure, right, or a vaccine. For influenza, the vaccines that we provide for influenza is a year after year because of the number of strains that are developing every time. So they mutate. And this is some of the suggestive consideration. We might produce a vaccine, but it is short vaccine antibody producing, and you might need a reinjection, or you might need several injection of dosing before you attain a titer of these antibodies. So what would be the impact? That is the impact. We have to make sure that whatever the vaccine has to be identified, is first the development of antibodies has to be longer, and second, the capacity for you to be protected would be wider in that stage, because there might be different strains of coronavirus now of COVID-19, we don't know. And if from a single strain, then what about if the other strain starts to infect you, or how you've been exposed to other strains? Would you develop even a different type of symptom? So these are some of the things that has to be taken into consideration in development of the vaccine. And hopefully all our friends who are developing it would find it and would really study it in very detail.
Okay ba? So, for
I
the
have
next question,
Yeah, I can actually see it.
manggagaling
Uh,
okay ba?
okay, just to help you. So there's a question with Mr. Ruiz. How much are expecting to pay for the vaccine? Um, uh, I really don't know the exact price or costing. I'm sorry, I can't give a very direct answer to that. This is dependent on if it's subsidized by the government or it will be supported by specific institutions. For sure, because this is a pandemic situation, I believe there will be some considerations apart from this. It may not be a purely privatized medication. When I say privatized medication, that you have to pay privately out of your pockets. It might be subsidized somehow, but I can't guarantee what specific price would it be. Hopefully, all right, since this is for en masse, everybody. Hopefully, it's not very costly. That's what I can say for that question. We have another here. I would like to ask any tips on how can we remove the stigma about the vaccines coming from China, considering that the virus hypothetically came from China. Well, the the industries that are developing vaccines in China, Sinovac, for example, Sinopharm, these are big institutions and they are vaccines experts as well. I mean, I have to say that in that aspect. And let's make sure that um, uh, everybody has to be transparent about it. They have to report the data. They have to show to us what the results are. And that's where we will rely, whether this is sufficiently evidentially good in terms of outcomes. So I think I understand that question, because the stigma is that it came from there. It might be because they know already that they have produced that it can be man-made, etc. There's even that theory, so therefore they can produce outright vaccine. But today they can't. They can. They. I mean, they have not, or they may not be transparent. But hopefully, I'm still relying into that best state that everybody is just trying their best to put up a full details of their reports in terms of the vaccine, and we base it from there. We'll base it from there. So, in your opinion, sino pong country ang may pinakamalaking development po in terms of clinical trials for COVID-19? Depending on where the vaccines are being tried, they will be pre-testing it. So, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, it's being prioritized. So somehow, halimbawa, for example, if let's say Philippines agreed with common terms with China or with Russia or with US, who is producing a vaccine. So they will be involved into that. So ang decision nito is prioritization, and it's being controlled, supported under the clinical trials committee set by the standards of World Health Organization. So it's dependent kasi naging ano na siya eh. Unlike when for any company to produce a particular drug, if it's a private drug or if it's a specific or a new drug to be developed and it's a private investment, we don't really release it. And it's the company's prerogative which countries, which population would start having the tests or the trials. But because this is a global situation, World Health is controlling it. All right. And the number of trials are being reported directly across. So we have here in Singapore, being part of the association, we have a central scientific committee who is actually collating all data for everybody, and we put that in place and we share it across whoever needs it. And this is like a transparent. This is the first time I'm seeing a lot of clinical trials that are being very transparent in terms of results. So it's there's no specific country that I mean, if you look into the aspect, probably China and Russia are doing the biggest group because they are the ones who have released it for early use. So they might have the bigger number of population who have been trying this for clinical studies sake. Okay.
Okay, so I think that would be the last question, Doc. So now let's move on to the awarding of certificates. So to award the certificate, may I call on Luisa Arlet Falcotello, the treasurer of the FEU Biological Science Society, to award the certificate. So yeah, Arlet.
Ayan po. So to award the Certificate of Appreciation, we award the certificate to Dr. Owen Sunga for his valuable contribution as speaker during the Biological Sciences Online Lecture Series 2020 with the topic COVID-19 Updates Emerging Treatment Strategies, held on October 23, 2020. Signed by the Department Chair of Department of Biological Sciences, Ma'am Binilda Olaza, and Dr. Wena Capulong Reyes, Dean of the Institute of Arts and Sciences. So, guys, let's take a picture with Dr. Owen po. If may we ask po to please open your cameras. Ayun po, we have 4 pages. I'll count po. Yan, smile everyone. Game on. Ano pa ba habol? Ayun. Ayan, game 1, 2, 3, smile. And next page po. Ayan. And last. Ayan, thank you po.
Okay, so just to remind everyone, meron po tayong evaluation form. So bago po kayo mag-leave, meron po tayong evaluation form na kailangan filapan. So nasa comment section po siya. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Owen. And now to formally close our event, let's have another faculty member from the Department of Biological Sciences, Miss our Ma'am Mary E. Gutierrez, to give the closing remarks. Ma'am Gutierrez.
Can you hear me?
Yes po.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone. I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Owen Songa for that very informative, detailed lecture about COVID, and of course, the surprising revelation about the discovery. And we are very thankful for that, for bringing us the good news. To our very supportive Dean of IAS,
Can you hear
Dr. Rowena Reyes. Of course, to our BioSoc officers who have organized again this lecture series. To Sir Christian Evasco for his unwavering support in extending his services as far as technical support is concerned. And to our faculty members who are here with us, of course, other attendees. Over the past few months, we are faced with uncertainties, confronted with baffling questions and anxieties. But at the end of the day, we remain steadfast for our family and hopeful that soon this pandemic will end. I am very delighted to have with us really Dr. Owen Songa. As I was listening to Dr. Owen, my God, we have many misconceptions about COVID. And thank you, Doc, for making us aware of the things we should know about COVID. The different pseudosciences, the fraud. Now we know Trump is really wrong, okay? And the facts and the things that we should know about COVID in order to protect ourselves. last Saturday, actually, PNMCC, the Philippine Network for Microbial Culture Collection, I have heard from academician Nina Gloriani also talk about the vaccine, different vaccine platforms. And with this, we need people like you, Dr. Owen, to enlighten us of all this progress in terms of vaccine discovery. We have heard, of course, that many companies, no, they are putting too much effort in discovering the right vaccine, like Sinovac, Sinopharma. What else did Dr. Owen mention? The CanSino Bio, Gamaleya Research Institute. Of course, with their promising researches, it gave us hope, no? And it will give us hope that this pandemic will end. Kasi ngayon, of course, not yet final, but with the talk of Dr. Owen, sabi nga niya kanina, bursting your bubbles, it comes when it comes to vaccine discovery. But we know very well, most especially Filipinos, we are very optimistic that soon this pandemic will end. And of course, right now, I hope by students and other attendees, we are already well informed because Dr. Owen has been with us to give us really the facts about COVID. Now that we are enlightened, I hope that we can protect more ourselves, our loved ones. So I would like, as I end formally this program, allow me to personally transcribe COVID, no? So there are five letters of COVID. Now, C stands for courage and compassion. Let's remember the courage of the frontliners to face COVID as they take care of the COVID patients with compassion. O for opportunities and optimism. COVID-19, let's just take it as a blessing in disguise. It gave different opportunities that have played a significant impact to many Filipinos to adapt to the new normal with optimism. And then the victorious. May we be victorious against all odds. I know that each one of us, we have our own problems regarding, of course, how to cope up with this new normal. And then I, inspiring, okay? Let's inspire one another. Like Dr. Owen Songa, no? You are an inspiration to us, Doctor. You know, I don't want to end this program. I want to listen more information about COVID, kung pwede nga lang. And that despite the presence of this dreaded disease, no, you inspire us to hope for the best, that someday we will, of course, beat this enemy number one, global enemy number one, COVID-19 viruses. And then last would be, of course, each one of us, no? Ito yung dinidream natin, yung letter D, death of COVID-19 pandemic. So as we look forward to that day when we can normally hug each other again, having not to fear, of course, to be contracted with this COVID-19, as we wait for that, no, may these pandemic moments will give us experiences, unforgettable experiences, lessons worth remembering. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Owen Song. God bless us all.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Gutierrez, for that. And so that ends our seminar for today. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Owen, for sharing your knowledge to all the biology students in here. And yung mga galing pa sa ibang program na nakisali po or umattend din ng ating event for today. Thank you so much, Doc.
Pleasure. Thank you also for inviting me.
Thank you, Doc Owen. It will not be
Thank
the
you, Doc
last
Owen.
word. It will
Thank
not
you,
be the
Doc Owen.
last. Thank
Nice
Thank
you.
to
you.
see you again.
Nice to see you, Dr. Lim. Thank you,
Bye.
Ma'am Mary, Ma'am Bennett.
Thank you, Doc.
Have a
Thank
good
you
Thank you,
very
Doc
day.
much.
Owen.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Doc!
Thank you, Doc Owen.
Thank you.
Pogi ka pa rin.